Dear friends, welcome to our channel. We are delighted to share with you different stories of love and betrayal from around the world. So let's begin our story journey today. Letting you sleep on the couch is my mercy. Lorelei coldly tossed me a blanket, her eyes filled with contempt. A man like you who accomplishes nothing and only drags the company down doesn't even deserve a doghouse. Tomorrow you'll get out immediately. My new boyfriend is moving in, and he doesn't want to see a failure like you in this house. Coincidentally, her mother Ingrid, who had come to visit her daughter, sarcastically added, "Humph, I said it from the beginning. My daughter marrying you was a blind mistake. With such a large family business and you managed to ruin it all." Thaddeus silently accepted the blanket, his chest feeling as if crushed by a massive stone. Even breathing brought pain. 10 years of marriage, to end like this. He didn't argue, just stood there quietly, his gaze like dark currents flowing beneath layers of ice. Outside, the sound of rain beating against the floor-to-ceiling windows, like countless sharp needles stabbing at this once warm home. The mansion in the suburbs of Toronto, Ontario Province, originally the fortress of their love, now felt like a prison. The couch was cold and hard, and throughout the night Thaddeus couldn't close his eyes, his mind constantly replaying the details of the past few months. Those little things he had overlooked, those signs that should have alerted him, and the warmth gradually disappearing from Lorelei's eyes. He didn't angrily question Lorelei about her infidelity, because at that moment, all his doubts had become certainties. 10 years of love, ultimately, could not withstand the erosion of reality. 5 years ago, Thaddeus took over Norwind Industrial Manufacturing, the company founded by his grandfather and expanded by his father. This enterprise, which specialized in industrial component production, once enjoyed high reputation in Eastern Canada, but with changes in the global supply chain and the rise of emerging markets, the company faced serious challenges. When Thaddeus took over, not only was market share continuously declining, but internal management also urgently needed updating. At the quarterly board meeting, Thaddeus had proposed a digital transformation plan. "We must embrace change," he explained to that group of grim-faced old men. "Continuing to rely on traditional production lines will only make us completely lose the market within 5 years." "I've been in this industry longer than your age," a white-haired director retorted. "Economic cycles rise and fall normally. There's no need for major changes." After the meeting, Thaddeus sat alone in the empty conference room, facing a pile of proposals marked with "needs further evaluation." He knew his vision was correct, but couldn't make those old ministers who had worked with his father for many years understand the urgency of change. This sense of powerlessness expanded like a shadow day by day. Lorelei had been an analyst in the company's marketing department. Thaddeus remembered when they first met, her eyes full of wisdom and keen market insight. At a departmental social gathering, she boldly pointed out flaws in the company's brand strategy and proposed highly creative improvement solutions. That night, Thaddeus was attracted by her talent and confidence. After marriage, Lorelei was promoted to Deputy Director of Marketing, responsible for the company's brand image revitalization and some market strategies. Initially, her enthusiasm and creativity injected fresh vitality into the company. However, as the company's challenges intensified, Lorelei's ambition and dissatisfaction also grew quietly. "Thaddeus, this is the third consecutive quarter of declining performance," Lorelei said during a Friday dinner, her tone filled with dissatisfaction. "When will those stubborn old men on the board listen to you?" "Change takes time," Thaddeus replied, rubbing his temples. "I'm negotiating a new cooperation model with suppliers, hoping to reduce production costs." "Time?" Lorelei let out a cold laugh. At this rate, by the time they finally agree to reform, the company might already be non-existent. As market pressure increased, Thaddeus invested more time in company reform. He began to push digital transformation, explore new markets, and even considered changing the company's core business model. These attempts triggered intense controversy within the board, with meetings often lasting until late at night, yet rarely with substantial progress. Gradually, Thaddeus became more silent. It wasn't that he didn't want to share with Lorelei, but that he didn't know how to express those frustrations and worries. He feared his vulnerability would shake Lorelei's confidence in the future. "You've been distracted lately." One night Lorelei turned over in bed, facing away from him. Are you bored being with me? It's just work issues that are quite complicated, Thaddeus answered softly. I need time to clear my thoughts. Always work, Lorelai's voice filled with bitterness. Have you ever thought about how I feel? Thaddeus reached out to touch her shoulder, but stopped at the last moment. He didn't know what to say, nor how to mend the growing rift between them. It was against this backdrop that Donovan appeared. Donovan was an experienced corporate acquisition consultant, introduced to the company by a board member, ostensibly to assist in evaluating strategic options. Impeccably dressed in a suit and with refined speech, he immediately gave the impression of a professional savior. Norwind has an impressive historical foundation and asset base, Donovan commented at the first meeting. It just needs some innovative thinking and market repositioning to awaken these dormant values. These words brightened the eyes of board members and also sparked Lorelai's strong interest in this new consultant. As marketing deputy director, Lorelai was assigned to work closely with Donovan to jointly evaluate the company's brand value and market strategies. Donovan had a respectable reputation in the business world. He had helped several medium-sized enterprises successfully transform or be acquired at high prices, and these success stories made his advice seem especially weighty. He was tall, spoke elegantly, and in every gesture revealed the confidence and charm of a successful person. Initially, Thaddeus welcomed Donovan's addition, believing that a new perspective might benefit the company. He arranged for Donovan to attend several high-level meetings and even invited him to industry dinners. However, Thaddeus failed to detect that behind those lengthy meetings and business lunches, Donovan was systematically approaching Lorelai and subtly influencing her judgment. From what I know, Thaddeus's reform direction has fundamental problems, Donovan told Lorelai during a private lunch. He focuses too much on internal innovation and gradual change, which is far from enough in the current fierce market environment. What Norwind needs is decisive strategic restructuring, even introducing new capital partners. Lorelai was attracted by Donovan's words. As marketing deputy director, she had always been dissatisfied with Thaddeus's cautious attitude, believing he lacked determination. Donovan's viewpoint seemed to confirm her thoughts. Then what strategy do you think we should adopt? Lorelai asked curiously. Donovan put down his coffee cup, leaned slightly forward, and lowered his voice. Repackage core assets, spin off non-core businesses, bring in strategic investors. With Norwind's brand value and asset base, if handled properly, not only can the downward trend be reversed, but core participants can reap substantial returns. How exactly? Lorelai's eyes sparkled with interest. This industry is undergoing consolidation, and large enterprises are very interested in small to medium companies with history and brand, Donovan explained. Norwind's value isn't in its current profitability, but in its accumulated brand recognition, land assets, and long-term customer relationships. These are very valuable in the acquisition market. Lorelai pondered for a moment. Thaddeus has always opposed selling the company or bringing in external investors. He believes it would betray his father's and grandfather's legacy. This is precisely the common thinking trap in family businesses. Donovan shook his head, overemphasizing tradition and continuity while ignoring value maximization. Frankly, if Thaddeus continues his current path, the company may eventually go bankrupt, which would be the greatest disrespect to the founders. As contacts increased, Donovan began to paint a more tempting picture for Lorelai. If operated according to his plan, not only could the company revive, but Lorelai herself could gain considerable wealth and higher social status. Imagine, Donovan said to Lorelai during a dinner, you're no longer just a corporate executive, but a business elite with true financial freedom. You could buy that seaside villa you've been eyeing, attend high society events, enjoy a life that truly belongs to you. Meanwhile, Donovan also began to display his personal charm. He remembered little things Lorelai liked, prepared carefully selected gifts for her, and gave just the right support and encouragement when she was discouraged. This meticulously designed care formed a stark contrast with Thaddeus's recent distraction. Lorelai began to compare Thaddeus with Donovan, one quiet and introverted, racking his brains over everyday company problems, the other confident and charismatic, with a broad vision, always seeming to find shortcuts to solve problems. This contrast grew increasingly vivid in her mind. Lorelai's attitude began to subtly change. She more frequently questioned Thaddeus's decisions at home, and in the company also began to privately communicate with some directors, suggesting that perhaps Thaddeus's leadership was insufficient to address the current crisis. At the same time, Lorelei's relationship with Donovan also gradually evolved from work contacts to personal encounters. Initially just after-work dinners and occasional movies, later becoming weekend outings and secret dates. Donovan, with sweet words and beautiful promises about the future, gradually occupied Lorelei's heart. "With me, you will have everything you deserve," Donovan held Lorelei's hand and promised. Not just material satisfaction, but career achievements and social status. "Thaddeus can't give you these things. He'll only drag you into the quagmire of that declining family business." Lorelei was attracted by this prospect and also conquered by Donovan's charm. She began planning how to leave Thaddeus while maintaining her position in the company, or even gaining more control. Donovan gave her professional advice. "The key is to secure enough shares. If you can get most of the shares under Thaddeus's name during the divorce, plus your existing ones, you would become the company's effective controller. At that point, we could proceed according to plan, restructure the company, and release its value." Thus, under Donovan's careful planning and manipulation, Lorelei not only developed an extramarital affair with him, but also began plotting how to wrest control of the company from Thaddeus's hands. The confrontation on that rainy night was no coincidence. Lorelei and Donovan had just finished dinner, discussing their future plan. Donovan told Lorelei it was time to make a decision, that they couldn't delay any further. "If you really want change, you must take action." Donovan held Lorelei's hand and said, "Tell Thaddeus you want a divorce. Tell him to move out. Only then can we start implementing our plan." Lorelei returned home and saw Thaddeus exhausted in his study, reviewing the latest financial reports. Days of accumulated discontent, coupled with Donovan's instigation, made her explode. Those harsh words, those merciless accusations, were all external manifestations of her internal struggle and ambition. And Ingrid, the mother who happened to be visiting, became the accelerator of this storm. Ingrid had always believed her daughter lowered herself by marrying Thaddeus. In her eyes, although Thaddeus came from a good family, he lacked real business talent and social charm. When she learned that Lorelei and that successful business consultant had grown close, she not only didn't dissuade her, but secretly supported her. "You should pursue your own happiness," Ingrid had told Lorelei. "If Thaddeus can't give you the life you want, why persist?" That night, when Thaddeus silently accepted the blanket and lay on the couch, his inner self wasn't as calm as it appeared. Anger, betrayal, humiliation, all these emotions came like waves. But stronger was a clear determination. 10 years of marriage, he had given his heart and trust, and in return, received betrayal and humiliation. "Enough," Thaddeus said to himself in the darkness. "It's time to end this." At dawn, Thaddeus got up, packed a few essentials, and headed straight to the company's legal counsel's office. "I need you to recommend a lawyer specializing in complex divorce cases," Thaddeus calmly said. "Preferably one particularly good at commercial asset division." The legal counsel was obviously shocked by Thaddeus's request, but quickly provided a name: Lawrence, one of Ontario's top divorce lawyers, specializing in complex property division cases for high-net-worth individuals. That same afternoon, Thaddeus met with Lawrence. "I want a divorce," Thaddeus said directly, "and I have some special requirements." After carefully listening to Thaddeus's statement, Lawrence nodded thoughtfully. "Are you sure you want to do this? This strategy carries considerable risk." "I'm sure." Thaddeus's voice was firm and calm. "She wants the company, so let her have what she wants and everything that comes with it." In the following days, Thaddeus and Lawrence met intensively, planning every detail of the divorce agreement. Additionally, he also began secretly contacting the company's core technical personnel and several key managers, preparing for the future. When Thaddeus returned home to formally propose divorce, Lorelei was first shocked, then couldn't hide her joy. In her view, Thaddeus was completely angered by her attitude and chose the quickest way to end this relationship. This was exactly what she had hoped for. "If that's your decision, I respect it." Lorelei pretended to be calm, but the satisfaction in her eyes was impossible to conceal. "We're indeed not suitable to continue together." The divorce process began more smoothly than Lorelai had anticipated. Thaddeus seemed unconcerned about the details of property division, simply authorizing Lawrence to handle everything. And Lawrence's proposal, on the surface, was extremely favorable to Lorelai. Thaddeus agreed to transfer 40% of his company shares to Lorelai, which, added to Lorelai's existing shares, was sufficient to make her the company's majority shareholder. Additionally, Thaddeus also agreed to transfer to Lorelai the ownership of several seemingly valuable company fixed assets, including an old factory in the city center and several plots of land in prime locations. When Lawrence delivered the draft divorce agreement to Lorelai's lawyer, she could hardly believe her luck. Donovan, after reviewing the agreement, told Lorelai, "Thaddeus is even weaker than I imagined. This is practically giving us money." Donovan quickly organized a small team of accountants and lawyers to evaluate the agreement. They noticed the complex clauses of the agreement, with appendices dozens of pages long, but in their hasty review, they mainly focused on the share transfer and asset distribution parts, without delving into those highly technical financial and legal terms. "These complex clauses are just standard legal terminology," Donovan's lawyer told him. "The main asset distribution is very clear and extremely favorable to Lorelai." Encouraged by Donovan, Lorelai quickly agreed to the divorce terms, eager to complete this process and begin her new life with Donovan. On the day the divorce agreement was signed, Thaddeus saw Lorelai for the last time. She wore an expensive suit with a confident and satisfied expression, while Thaddeus, dressed in his usual dark suit, had a face so calm it almost seemed indifferent. When both signed the last name on the documents, Lorelai couldn't help but show a victorious smile. "Good luck, Lorelai," Thaddeus calmly said. "You're going to need it." Lorelai dismissed Thaddeus's words, just glanced at him contemptuously, then turned and left, as if impatient to start her new life. What she didn't know was that the wheels of fate had already begun to turn, and she and Donovan were about to face a storm they had completely failed to anticipate. The day after the divorce agreement took effect, Thaddeus did two things. First, he formally resigned from all his positions in the company, including the CEO and chairman of the board roles. This news immediately caused a stir within the company. Although the company's recent performance was poor, Thaddeus had always been viewed as the soul of the company, and his sudden departure made many employees feel uneasy and confused. Second, he took with him several core technical personnel and key managers of the company, people who had worked with Thaddeus for many years and were loyal to him. They quietly left, taking with them some core technical knowledge and customer relationships. When Lorelai learned of this news, far from being worried, she felt pleased. In her view, Thaddeus's departure meant she could work more smoothly with Donovan to restructure the company according to their plan. And as for those departing employees, in her eyes they were merely Thaddeus's old subordinates, who could quickly be replaced by newly recruited talent. "This is the best outcome," Donovan told Lorelai upon hearing the news. "Now no one can stop us. You are now Norwin's effective controller. We can start implementing the restructuring plan." However, while Lorelai and Donovan were reveling in the joy of victory, unexpected things began to happen. 3 days after the divorce agreement took effect, Lorelai received a notice from the company's main supplier, stating that according to the long-term supply contract, the company needed to pay a sum of 2 million Canadian dollars within 3 days for purchases, or face a breach of contract lawsuit. Lorelai was surprised by this sudden debt and immediately checked the contract details, only to discover that Thaddeus, in the past 6 months, to ensure stable supply of core components, had signed strict long-term purchase agreements with several suppliers, and the payment responsibility for these agreements, with the transfer of shares, now fell on Lorelai. "This is impossible," Lorelai told Donovan. "I never heard of these contracts." Donovan frowned as he reviewed the contract documents. "This is strange, but it seems these agreements are completely legal, and the minutes of last quarter's board meeting show that these contracts were indeed approved." Lorelai then remembered that in the board meetings of the past few months, she was often distracted and simply voted in favor of some supply chain optimization proposals presented by Thaddeus without really understanding the specific content. Next, on the fourth day, The company's main lending bank sent a letter indicating that due to the change in the company's legal representative and effective controller, they needed to reassess the loan risk and required Lorelei, as the new majority shareholder, to provide personal guarantees, or they would recall part of the loans. These loans totaled over 5 million Canadian dollars and were an important source of operating funds for the company. This is absurd. Lorelei protested over the phone to the bank representative. The company's assets are sufficient as collateral. Why is my personal guarantee needed? This is standard procedure, Ms. Matthews, the bank representative calmly replied, especially considering the company's recent financial condition and management changes. In fact, it was Mr. Reed's personal credit record and family reputation that made the bank willing to offer such favorable loan terms previously. Now the situation has changed. We need to reassess the risk. On the fifth day, worse news arrived. A rectification notice from the Environmental Department landed on Lorelei's desk. The notice pointed out that the old factory Lorelei had just acquired in the divorce had serious environmental hazards that required immediate rectification, with an estimated cost exceeding 3 million Canadian dollars, or face significant daily accumulating fines. Why did no one tell me about these problems before? Lorelei threw the notice in front of Donovan. That old factory was supposedly one of the most valuable industrial properties in the area. Donovan picked up the notice and read it carefully. It mentions here that the environmental assessment report was completed 3 months ago, but strangely, this report seems to have never been discussed in the board meetings. Lorelei immediately had her secretary retrieve all board documents and meeting minutes from the past few months. In some inconspicuous appendix of a thick stack of documents, they found that environmental assessment report, which indeed had been submitted to the board as an attachment to other matters, but was never formally discussed. This is so cunning, Donovan murmured, a flash of unease in his eyes. It seems Thaddeus is much smarter than we thought. Thus, in just 3 days, Lorelei suddenly found herself facing over 10 million Canadian dollars in immediate financial pressure, all hidden liabilities tied to those seemingly valuable assets acquired in the divorce agreement. Worse still, with the departure of Thaddeus and the core team, the company's daily operations also began to experience problems. Important customers started asking where their usual business contacts had gone. No one could answer technical details of some customized products, and the sales team was at a loss when faced with customer inquiries. We need to immediately recruit new technical and management talent, Lorelei announced at an emergency meeting. Meanwhile, Donovan will act as a strategic advisor to help the company formulate a transformation plan. However, when Donovan tried to introduce his so-called strategic investors, they encountered an unexpected obstacle. Lorelei's lawyer, after carefully reading the divorce agreement, became somber. There's a problem, the lawyer said, pointing to a clause in the agreement. It states here that if you attempt to introduce strategic investors not approved in writing by Thaddeus within 6 months of acquiring the shares, he retains priority repurchase rights and veto power over the company's core assets. What does that mean? Lorelei asked, confused. Simply put, the lawyer explained, in the next 6 months, you cannot sell the company to any third party, nor can you allow any external investor to gain control of the company, unless Thaddeus agrees in writing. If you violate this clause, Thaddeus has the right to repurchase the company's core patents and brands at a predetermined price, and that price is very low. Donovan took the document in disbelief. This can't be legal. I've already had experts assess it, the lawyer said helplessly. This clause is completely valid and legally binding. In fact, similar clauses are not uncommon in family business asset transfers, aimed at preventing core assets from being improperly disposed of. But why didn't you warn me about this when we signed the agreement? Lorelei demanded angrily. The lawyer looked embarrassed. This clause was cleverly embedded in a 12-page technical appendix, using extremely specialized legal terminology. I admit I may have underestimated its importance. Lorelei then began to realize that the divorce agreement that seemed extremely favorable to her was actually a legal trap carefully designed by Thaddeus. When she asked more legal experts to review the agreement, they pointed out that every clause in the agreement was legally valid and designed very cleverly, tying all debts and risks to those seemingly valuable assets. It's like a carefully designed chess game, a senior lawyer commented. Every move is designed to guide you into a predetermined outcome. By then, the company's cash flow had already begun to tighten. Pressure from suppliers for payment, the bank's loan risk assessment, high environmental rectification costs, plus reduced income due to customer loss, were bringing the company to an unprecedented financial crisis. Lorelei began to panic. She dialed Thaddeus's phone, but the number had been disconnected. She contacted Thaddeus's lawyer Lawrence, but the response she received was, "All communication should be conducted through formal legal channels." The desperate Lorelei even went to Thaddeus's new residence, attempting to speak with him face to face, but was told Thaddeus was not in and did not accept any unscheduled visitors. "Tell him we can renegotiate," Lorelei told the apartment manager. "Tell him I'm willing to return those shares, as long as he can help resolve the current crisis." The manager simply nodded politely, promising to convey the message, but Lorelei knew these words would likely never reach Thaddeus's ears. As Lorelei sank into despair, Donovan's attitude also began to subtly change. Initially, he would still comfort Lorelei, saying they would surely find a solution. But as the crisis deepened, his calls became less frequent, and meetings were often canceled or postponed. "We need to rethink our strategy," Donovan told Lorelei in a phone call. "The current situation is much more complicated than we expected. I need time to research more options." Lorelei felt a twinge of unease. "You said there were investors interested in the company. What do they say?" About that." Donovan's voice hesitated. "Considering the company's current situation and those legal restrictions, they've decided to wait and observe for a while." 2 weeks later, when Lorelei learned that Donovan had accepted a consultant position at a company in Vancouver, she completely collapsed. "You said you would always support me," Lorelei cried into the phone. "You said together we could rebuild the company, create new value." "Lorelei, listen," Donovan's voice was calm and distant. "I truly believed Norwind had potential, but the current situation has exceeded my expectations. Those debts, those legal restrictions, and all those traps Thaddeus left. This is no longer something a simple restructuring can solve. As a professional consultant, I must be responsible for my professional reputation." "So you're abandoning me?" Lorelei's voice was filled with disbelief. "I'm not abandoning you," Donovan defended. "I just think, in the current situation, we both need to reassess. When things stabilize, perhaps we can revisit the possibility of collaboration." But Lorelei knew this was merely a polite breakup speech. When the crisis erupted, Donovan chose to protect himself, leaving her alone at the eye of the storm. Back home, Lorelei found herself trapped in an unprecedented predicament. The company was about to collapse, Donovan had abandoned her, and those valuable assets obtained in the divorce were actually sources of debt and trouble. Just then, her mother Ingrid arrived at her home. How did it come to this? Ingrid looked at her exhausted daughter, unable to believe how things had taken such a drastic turn. "Where's Donovan? Didn't he say he would help you?" Lorelei smiled bitterly. "He's gone, Mom. When he realized this game couldn't continue, he left." Ingrid finally understood the cruel reality. "What about Thaddeus? Have you tried contacting him? Maybe he would be willing to." "He won't," Lorelei interrupted her mother. "He planned all this specifically to make me taste the bitter fruit of betrayal. And I can't blame him." In the days that followed, Lorelei tried various methods to contact Thaddeus: phone calls, emails, even personal visits to places where he might appear. Her attitude also gradually changed from initial anger and accusation to pleading and admitting her mistake. "Thaddeus, I know I made a huge mistake," she wrote in an email. "But please at least give me a chance to explain. The company is your grandfather's and father's life's work. Can you really bear to see it destroyed in my hands?" But Thaddeus seemed to have completely erased her from his life, with no response whatsoever. Meanwhile, the company's situation continued to deteriorate. Creditors began to exert greater pressure, demanding immediate debt repayment. The bank froze part of the company's accounts to secure their loans. Several key customers also notified termination of cooperation, turning to seek more stable suppliers. A month later, Lorelei had to face the harsh reality. The company could no longer be saved. Bankruptcy proceedings were about to begin. Her assets, the old factory, land, even her mansion, were all seized by creditors due to associated debts. 10 years of marriage, a few weeks of wild joy, then a lifetime of regret. Lorelei finally understood the mistake she had made and the price she had paid. Meanwhile, Thaddeus had already begun a new life on the other side of the city. After leaving the family business, Thaddeus didn't immediately start a new venture. He first gave himself a month's vacation, traveling alone to Europe, visiting those historic cities and museums he had always wanted to go to but couldn't do to his busy work. This trip gave him a chance to rethink the past and future, and also helped him gradually recover from the painful marriage and betrayal. Upon returning to Canada, Thaddeus began his long-planned new venture. He contacted the core team members who had followed him from Norwind, as well as some like-minded investors, and established a brand new company, NeoSync Technologies. This company no longer focused on traditional industrial component manufacturing, but turned to the more promising field of industrial automation solutions, precisely the transformation direction Thaddeus wanted to push at Norwind but couldn't achieve. Establishing the new company wasn't smooth sailing. In the initial stage, funds were tight, the team small, and everyone had to wear multiple hats. Thaddeus personally participated in product design discussions, visited potential customers, and even helped with packaging and shipping when needed. But unlike the experience at Norwind, there were no board constraints here, no traditional baggage, and the team's enthusiasm and cohesion were unprecedentedly high. At Norwind, we spent 6 months discussing whether to adopt new technology, then another 6 months arguing how to implement it, Thaddeus recalled at a team meeting. At NeoSync, we make decisions in 2 weeks and start testing in a month. This is our advantage: speed and flexibility. Without the burden of the family business and board constraints, NeoSync achieved remarkable results in just a few months. Their developed industrial automation solutions quickly attracted industry attention, and initial customers also gave positive feedback. Although the scale wasn't large yet, the growth rate was amazing. Thaddeus wholeheartedly devoted himself to the new company's development, almost no longer concerning himself with Lorelei or Norwind's situation. His assistant would regularly collect relevant news and information, but Thaddeus rarely inquired. He had decided to put that past completely behind him. To Lorelei's pleas for help and begging, Thaddeus only sent a brief legal letter through Lawrence. All communication must be conducted through formal legal channels. Regarding Norwind matters, we strictly follow the provisions in the divorce agreement. This indifference wasn't out of revenge, but Thaddeus's protection of his own heart. He had already paid enough emotional price for that relationship. Now was the time to cut it off completely. One evening, Thaddeus worked alone until late at his new company's office. Standing by the floor-to-ceiling window, gazing at Toronto's night scenery, his thoughts wandered. He had to admit, although Lorelei and Donovan's betrayal brought him immense pain, it was precisely this crisis that ultimately pushed him to make changes and take a path more suitable for himself. Sometimes, losing is the beginning of gaining, he softly said to himself, then turned back to the computer to continue his work. Meanwhile, Lorelei's life had undergone a complete transformation. With Norwind's bankruptcy, she lost her career and wealth, and also shouldered huge debts. Seized properties had to be sold, but the amounts obtained were far from enough to repay all debts. She had to move back to Ingrid's small apartment, relying on her mother's pension to barely maintain their livelihood. The once glamorous marketing deputy director now worked as an ordinary copywriter at a small advertising agency, starting even lower than when she had just graduated. Every morning, sitting on the crowded bus, Lorelei often thought of her past life, of Thaddeus's warning, of Donovan's promises, and her own greed and credulity. In her most desperate moments, Lorelei had thought about contacting Donovan, even if just seeking a little financial help. She searched for his information on social media and found he seemed to be doing well in Vancouver, still maintaining that suited, smiling, successful consultant image. But whenever she gathered the courage to send a message, that cold, distant tone from his phone call would echo in her ears, making her abandon the idea. "He won't help me," Lorelei told Ingrid. "He already considers me a past mistake, an error to be quickly forgotten." Ingrid sighed. "I should have seen that man wasn't reliable. But I was so eager then for you to have a good life, so distrusting of Thaddeus." "No, Mom. The responsibility is mine." Lorelei shook her head. "It was I who was blinded by interest and vanity. It was I who betrayed the marriage vows." Thaddeus had already given me enough respect and trust, and I betrayed all that. A year later, one afternoon, as Lorelei passed a newly completed office building in the city center, she caught a glimpse of a familiar figure. Thaddeus and several suited men were walking out of the building, looking like they had just concluded an important meeting. He looked spirited, more confident and composed than in her memory. Lorelei's first reaction was to rush over, even if just to say one word, express a bit of remorse. But in the end, she just stood in the crowd, silently watching Thaddeus get into a luxury car and drive away. Some mistakes, once made, never have a chance to be remedied. Some relationships, once broken, cannot be rebuilt. Meanwhile, Thaddeus's NeoSync Technologies was reaching an important milestone. The company's developed intelligent factory management system had gained industry recognition, and the client list was continuously expanding. A well-known venture capital firm had just agreed to invest 5 million Canadian dollars to help NeoSync further expand its scale and market share. "We've found the right direction," Thaddeus told reporters at a press conference. "Traditional industry is undergoing digital transformation, and our mission is to help them smoothly navigate this process." No one mentioned Norwind. No one inquired about the past. Thaddeus had successfully positioned himself as a forward-looking tech entrepreneur rather than a failed family business heir. As for Donovan, his days in Vancouver weren't as smooth as displayed on social media. Norwind's failure case was widely circulated in business circles, and many potential clients began to doubt his merger and acquisition expertise. He had to lower his fees and accept some smaller-scale consulting projects. "How's business lately?" an old friend asked him at a cocktail party. "Not bad, building a new client network," Donovan answered with a smile. But the anxiety in his eyes betrayed him. "You know, this industry always has its ups and downs." In fact, Donovan knew his professional reputation had been seriously damaged. Norwind's case was analyzed by some business magazines as a typical merger and acquisition disaster. And although not directly named, industry insiders knew who that overly confident consultant referred to. 2 years later, when Thaddeus's NeoSync Technologies successfully went public, becoming a new star in Canada's industrial technology field, Lorelei saw the related report in the newspaper. In the photo, Thaddeus stood at the stock exchange's Bell podium, smiling, his gaze firm and confident. Lorelei gently stroked the photo in the newspaper, her eyes filled with complex emotions. Regret, remorse, admiration, and nostalgia for the past, all feelings intertwined. She knew, in some parallel universe, perhaps she would be standing beside Thaddeus, experiencing this glorious moment together. But in this reality, she had forever lost that chance. That night, Lorelei sat alone by the window of Ingrid's small apartment, gazing at Toronto's night scenery. The same city, the same lights, but for her, it was a completely different world. Her eyes were filled with reflection on the past, acceptance of the present, and a glimmer of hope for the future. And on the other side of the city, Thaddeus stood by the floor-to-ceiling window of NeoSync headquarters, looking at the same night scenery, but with anticipation for the future and satisfaction with current achievements. That painful past had faded away, like a dim star in the night sky, no longer able to affect his forward steps. If this story resonated with you, please don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to our channel for more fascinating content. We look forward to seeing you in our next story.